Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Think Before You Hate podcast. I'm Alex with the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, and we're the city's civil rights agency. What we do is we fight discrimination and prejudice by enforcing the Chicago Human Rights Ordinance as well as the Chicago Fair Housing Ordinance. And today we have the great pleasure of speaking with Maria de las Nieves Bolaños, who is the board president of NELA, or the National Employment Lawyers Association. And today what we are going to discuss is civil rights and employment law. So without further ado, Nieves, will you please tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up?
Sure. First, thanks for having me here.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
And I grew up in the Yakima Valley, first the Lower Valley and then Yakima proper, which is in central Washington state. It's an agricultural community. So we had a really large migrant worker population. And I grew up seeing my mom do work to help, some of the more vulnerable communities in that community, in particular farm workers. She worked with the Farm Workers Union, and then later she was a grade school teacher, a bilingual teacher in the grade schools. So that's kind of where I came from.
Yes. Thank you for specifying what valley is. Yeah, I wouldn't know. I'm from Connecticut, and, there's parts of Illinois I still don't know of.
Same. I'm a transplant, too.
Yeah, so as you already know. Now, what inspired you to go to law school and specifically focus on employment law?
The decision to go to law school, I think, I thought about it a lot when I was growing up. It was, it's when you're a kid and you argue a lot or you're contrary and people say, you should be a lawyer.
Yep.
So then
perfect. You just never stopped. You just kept going.
Exactly. So, once I kind of knew a little bit more about what that might mean, I thought, it sounded like maybe a good fit. And it wasn't. I did not enjoy law school that much. But I did think that there was a way to use it for some good. And I initially thought that would be, immigration law. And but the more I did, sort of looking into that and doing work in that area of the law, it's pretty heavy, and the consequences are pretty intense, and it hit a little close to home. So I wanted to look for something that still felt like I could make an impact and help people, but maybe with, a little bit of distance, I guess, is maybe the best way to say it. Okay. But, I thought, workers' rights, I was introduced to it by my mentor and longtime law partner who recently retired, Robin Potter. And she's an absolute relentless advocate for workers' rights. And when I met her, it was the first time I really felt like, okay, this is something I could do, be passionate about, really, give myself to. And it was also the first time I really felt comfortable, like in a law firm sort of, legal environment, because, she was really, really passionate, and she, cursed, and nobody wore suits. Everybody was kind of, doing their own thing. And,
right.
It was the work that was important. And, it felt really scrappy. And we were going up against, huge companies with all kinds of resources, but holding our own. And so, yeah, it really felt good. It felt like a great fit.
Yeah, definitely. Will you please tell us about, a little bit about NELA, its mission, and what your role as a board president entails?
Sure. So NELA is for lack of a better term, it's a bar association, but it's the largest bar association in the nation that is comprised of workers' rights attorneys exclusively. And the mission is empowering workers' rights attorneys through legal training, promoting a fair judiciary, and advocating for laws and policies that level the playing field for workers. The vision is, a future in which workers are treated with dignity and respect. Workplaces are equitable and diverse and inclusive, and the well-being of workers is a priority in business practices. The idea is that we want to do everything as an organization that we can to empower workers' rights attorneys to do their job the best way possible. And that includes, getting laws enacted, enforcing laws, giving, trainings and CLEs, providing amicus support, when cases go up on appeal or otherwise, and, lobbying Congress, for better workers' rights protections.
Right.
So.
How has NELA's work evolved in response to changes in the labor market or social movements such as the hashtag #MeToo movement and the trend to stop DEI initiatives?
It's an interesting thing about NELA, and it's one of the things I really think is a big strength, and that is that no matter what's going on in the world, our mission and what we're doing and the support that we provide is the same, and that is to empower workers' rights attorneys, right? So we've gotten really good and adaptable at sort of meeting the moment when things like this come up, and that includes when, Me Too movement was going on. That includes now when we're seeing attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, when we're seeing attacks on transgender rights cases and disparate impact, as well as federal employees, right? So NELA continues we're able to stay steadfast, and that's the strength. We continue to provide support. We continue to provide education, continuing learning opportunities for all of our members. And we're working with, I'd say, some of the most successful and brilliant minds, legal minds that are advocating for workers every single day, and they're doing it across the country. And some of them are working in jurisdictions that are less friendly than others. And so we have their expertise and experience to lean on when things get.
Yeah. How effective would you say are current federal laws like Title VII or the ADA in protecting workers today?
Look, those laws are extremely important, right? And it's great and important that we have them in place. But there are challenges for sure. One of the big challenges is damages caps. We see juries who want to award millions of dollars to workers who have been treated sometimes really horribly in the workplace or, suffered gross retaliation. I mean, these kinds of things can absolutely destroy people's careers, wreak havoc on their personal life, affect their health. So when a jury hears these stories, and it's their purview to say how much they think the plaintiff is entitled to, then we see judges who are bound by these statutory caps, and they're dropping down to several $100,000 as opposed to the millions that a jury truly wanted to award. So that's a big issue. And it seems inequitable that, we wouldn't allow a jury to award the appropriate amount of damages, because that's what we said they're there to do. Another challenge is a requirement for a minimum number of employees, which means that there are millions of workers who have no recourse because they don't work in a location that has more than 15 employees. And so they're just exempted from the protections. And then I'd say another big issue is administrative exhaustion. In order to utilize those laws and those protections and bring a case, you have to go through the administrative process at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And that's, it's not straightforward for anyone. And, we're dealing with an agency that's staffed by really, wonderful people, brilliant attorneys who, a lot of times are very, very dedicated to, workers' rights. However, it's an agency that has been, I think, since its inception, grossly underfunded. And so their capacity is extremely limited in, actually effectuating and enforcing these laws and in doing really complete investigations. So it is a challenge. Also a challenge that we have, 300 days to file those charges, and that's an extremely short statute of limitations. If someone walked up to you on the street and kicked you in the shins, you get 2 years to decide if you want to to bring a claim against them. 300 days to decide whether you're going to sue your employer. Sometimes while you're still working there is a pretty heavy thing, particularly in light of, all the vulnerabilities that workers can have, whether they're documented, whether they're disabled, whether there's other, employers in the area. So.
Right, yeah.
I'd say that, as you can see, I've thought about this a little.
Just a tad. It's obviously you're really passionate for your work. What gives you hope about the future of workplace civil rights?
I think, first and foremost, the courage of the clients and the workers that I have the honor of working with and representing every day. The fact that people will absolutely speak truth to power, even when it's not necessarily in their best interest financially, or for their career prospects going forward. I think, that inspires me all the time. People who are willing to take those risks in order to seek justice. Also, the incredibly skilled and committed advocates that I have the extreme honor of working with through organizations like NELA, in particular NELA. That's always inspiring to me and gives me hope. As long as we have workers who are willing to, be brave enough to raise these issues, and we have, advocates who are brave enough to take on their cases with them, I think there's hope.
Oh, can you tell us your favorite success story creating positive change while working with NELA?
Really difficult to pick one, and really difficult because success looks different, right, today than it did maybe other years. But I'd say recently, I was really proud of the way, we saw these unprecedented attacks on federal workers, right? And we saw, an attack on transgender rights. And we saw, directives saying, we're not going to investigate these claims at the administrative agencies anymore. And, the EEOC was required to pull out and withdraw and brought motions to dismiss all of their pending legal claims on behalf of transgender individuals. And in both those situations, NELA attorneys just rallied in a way that was so impressive and inspiring. We have a federal employee practice group, and those folks immediately were putting together trainings. On our listserv, completely buzzing with, advice, coordinating, trying to help to ensure that all those employees had someone they could call, talk to, get representation. They brought class action cases. They brought cases on behalf of, federal employees, both at the very top levels and, at the core levels of our government. And that was super impressive. When we got wind of the fact that the EEOC was bringing the motions to dismiss in their transgender rights cases, same thing. Everybody rallied and we figured it out, and we got people in touch so that those cases wouldn't just be dismissed and fall by the wayside. We were able to coordinate so that those folks had access to attorneys who would represent them and continue their cases even after the EEOC had decided to cease litigating.
Yeah, that's amazing. Perfect answer. Now, as we're wrapping up our conversation, here's the question that I'm going to ask you that I ask all of our guests. In your opinion, what can our listeners do in their everyday lives to combat hate and discrimination?
It's a really important question, and it's, I think, something that we all should think about more often than we might, because life is busy, right? And we get caught up with the day-to-day. But in a time like this where, there are attacks on, initiatives promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, I think it's really all the more important to continue that work, whether it's part of a formal policy or just in our own lives. Everybody holds bias, right? Sure. Implicit, sometimes not implicit. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize and identify our own biases and then put in the work to correct them. You can do a lot of, reading helps. Podcasts help. Right. Yeah,
definitely podcasts.
Absolutely. But, also I think just, being a part of your community, expanding what the idea of community means and, sort of taking really affirmative steps to educate yourself about other cultures, other nationalities, expand your worldview to include the experiences of others, that aren't necessarily like you.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed today that you wanted to bring up?
I think this is a really challenging time for workers. I think that they're under attack on a variety of levels. We saw here in our own town that, workers were being kidnapped on the job for no reason and just taken away, right? And deprived of due process and other rights to which they're entitled, documented or not, So I think it's a really difficult time and it's really scary. But I am heartened by the fact that, our community and our city showed out in support of those workers and that there have been so many affirmative steps to confirm that we are a welcoming city, and your access to the courts and to seek justice when there is injustice in the workplace will be protected. So I'm grateful for that, but it's a tough time for workers.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Now, lastly, if anyone wants to reach out to NELA or follow NELA on social media, how can they do so?
We are active on Instagram and Twitter as well. And Instagram, you can follow us at NELA_workers' rights, and on Twitter at NELA_HQ.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Nieves. And thank you very much to all of our listeners for joining us today for another episode of the Think Before You Hate podcast. Remember, if you or anybody you know believes that they've been a victim of discrimination, please do not hesitate to contact the Chicago Commission on Human Relations at 312-744-4111. Again, that is 312-744-4111. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, we're on X, and most recently Blue Sky. And remember, until next time, think before you hate.